they have acknowledged that Iran is an influential player on regional issues. They do share common interests, especially at this juncture when we want to talk about extremism and terrorism as a whole, from Iraq to Syria to Afghanistan. I mean, why is it that the U.S. is not taking advantage of this situation, or are there behind-the-scene talks that have taken place that we may not be aware of, that some are deducting may even have been part of this nuclear deal that, at least in the interim, has been reached between Iran and the world powers?
It's already been confirmed, at least on the U.S. side, that there were those off-the-record discussions beforehand, and that in a way what was happening in Geneva was for show. They had already agreed in advance on some of the terms. And you're right, and Iran and the U.S. have a lot of coinciding interests. And as I mentioned before in this program, in a way, Iran and the U.S. should be natural allies, because given the political situation, geopolitical situation we find ourselves in. I mean, normally a country would want to ally with a more distant power and not a close one. And Iran's economy is really oriented, it should be oriented towards the West. I mean, Iran should export oil and gas and other items and receive Western in technology to upgrade what it already has. That would be the natural partnership. And again, we do have the kind of common interest you mentioned. There's some evidence that there's a shared concern about what's happening in some of the other countries with the Sunni extremists. So it's just a matter of, as I said, building on the areas of cooperation and minimizing those where we disagree as we move forward.
Well, Fuad Azadi, there's a new landscape in the region, and it comes at the expense of two of America's allies, Israel and Saudi Arabia, of which we have seen how the U.S. is shifting in terms of its foreign policy away from Saudi Arabia. And of course, when it comes to Israel, we know how that has angered Israel in terms of U.S. and Iran getting closer. So at this point, are we going to see any type of a cooperation between the U.S. and Iran, which is going to come at the expense of two of its major allies in the region?
Well, what we have is an alliance between the Saudi government and the Israeli government. And the alliance is basically formed to oppose Iran. Both countries oppose Iran quite drastically. And since they have a common enemy in the last many years, they are basically cooperating on a number of issues very quietly. The result of that cooperation is what you see in the Middle East now. The Middle East of today is a result of this cooperation. You have terrorist organizations basically funded by the Saudi government that are destroying Iraq. They're destroying Syria. You have a conflict between Israel and Palestine for the last many decades that is not finishing, that is not reaching a settlement. And so you have a lot of chores and wars and killings and bloodshed all over this region. We have some American officials that are realizing that this is not where they want to be. This is not good for the people of this region, and they're realizing that this current situation is not good for the United States. And the result is that we have Secretary Kerry going to the occupied territories. I think the last time he went a couple of days ago was his 10th trip there, trying to get some sort of agreement between the two sides. And then normally when he leaves Tel Aviv, the Israeli government announces new settlements being built, new buildings being built, basically sending a signal that the Israeli government, the current Israeli government, is not really interested in reaching some sort of settlement with the Palestinians. So in reality, what we see is what Iran says, which terrorism is not good, all these killings is not good, the policy in Syria trying to overthrow Bashar Assad's government is not really a good policy, and The Israeli treatment of Palestinians is a major problem. These are all Iranian leaders' talking points. And so you see that, and then you see, without really using the rhetoric, the American officials in the Obama administration are basically saying more or less the same thing. So I think the end of this issue is going to be whether the forces within the United States that oppose Obama's foreign policy are going to be successful or not, whether these 50-some senators that have signed, that have co-sponsored this new Iran sanctions bill, are they going to be able to pass it? Are they going to be able to override the presidential veto? So we also have a fight within Washington, and the result of this fight is going to determine whether the Saudi-Israeli alliance is going to win and then create more difficulties for this part of the world or not. So we just have to watch what's going on in Washington.
Richard Weiss, does everything hang on this nuclear deal, or are we going to see the motions that are put forward in terms of at least, for example, the cooperation that may, at this point, occur between the United States and Iran in terms of some regional countries, i.e., for example, Iraq, even though Iran has said that it's not going to be working with the U.S. directly in terms of fighting what is going on in Anbar province. Is it going to reach a point where the nuclear deal, if it's not signed, that it's going to just completely wipe away anything in terms of a relationship between the U.S. and Iran?
The question is a good one. It's not, but I think you phrase it a little too stark. It's not that it would wipe out any possible cooperation. I mean, you've had cooperation de facto in many areas between the two countries over narcotics trafficking, for example. And certainly in Iraq, we've got a common concern about spillover of violence from Syria into the Sunni regions and beyond in Iraq. But the Obama administration, and that's pretty much supported by others, including the Congress, has said that it's essential that we come to an understanding on the nuclear issue. The argument is that as the administration puts it, if they cannot trust Iran to fulfill its nuclear obligations, they cannot trust Iran to fulfill any other obligations. And so it's seen as something of a prerequisite for the more comprehensive cooperation. But I wouldn't exclude some tactical cooperation on specific issues as we go forward, even without the nuclear deal.
And Fuad Izzadi, I need to discuss this because it is something that Iran's leader has said, and this has been stated time and again by other analysts also, that it is not the sanctions that has brought Iran to the negotiating table. Why does the U.S. not recognize that?
You know, we have a problem in terms of getting good analysis on why Iran came to the negotiating table. We have a lot of people within the Obama administration and a lot of people in the Congress that have made this wrong conclusion that Iran came to the negotiating table because of the sanctions. And the reason this analysis is wrong is because Iranian behavior throughout the last many years with all the sanctions that was leveled against Iran did not change. In fact, Iran's nuclear program has steadily increased its capacity. This is what actually John Kerry said in the morning of the day that the Geneva Agreement was reached. He said that 10 years ago, Iran had 164 centrifuges. Now Iran has 19,000 centrifuges. So if the argument for this idea that sanctions caused Iran to come to the negotiating table was right, then this increase in Iran's nuclear capacity should not happen. Iran, because of sanctions, should have changed its policy and reduced its nuclear activities. The reason, I think, that Iran came to the negotiating table was because of what Obama administration was saying in the last many months. Obama was sending letters to Iranian leaders. We had meetings between Iranian officials and American officials in Oman. A number of them took place. And what Iranian leaders realize, that maybe there is a window of opportunity in Washington. Maybe the current US government is actually willing to recognize some of Iran's rights, for example, the right to enrich, and then maybe there is an opportunity to resolve this portfolio. And you can be assured, if we had a government like the Bush government, or we had some other government in Washington that was not talking the same way and sending messages the same way or meeting the same way as the Obama administration is doing, I think you can be certain that Iranian officials would not have come to the negotiating table. So I think the reason they are there is because of what they see coming from Obama administration. And this is something that, unfortunately, the other side is not realizing. The other side thinks Iran is at the table because of the sanctions. It is true that Iranian people are hurting from sanctions. Iran's economy is not doing well because of sanctions and because of internal problems also. These are all true. But Iran's foreign policy is not going to be dictated by the economic difficulties of the country. Iranian leaders realize that they are selling less oil, but they realize that with this situation they can continue for some time. Iran was not selling as much oil as 2 years ago, but Iran was selling some oil that was sufficient to run the country for some time to go. So the real reason that they came to the negotiating table is because of what they saw in Washington. And unless people in the Obama administration realize this point, they are not going to be able to get from Iran what they want. They need to realize why Iranians came to the negotiating table, and then they can have a better analysis on what to do with Iran.
Very well. We're going to have to end it there. Thank you very much, Professor at the University of Tehran, Fouad Izzadi there, and Senior Fellow at the Hudson Institute, Richard Weiss, spoke to us from Washington. Thanks for watching another edition of The Debate. From Mikhail Taqwa and the entire team here in the capital, Tehran, it's goodbye.